I stared at my mother's name on my phone screen, my hand shaking like I'd grabbed a live wire. 7 years of silence, and now this. Her voice came through desperate and broken, begging me to come home. They were losing the house, facing homelessness. She needed my help, my money. I could hear my father crying in the background, and for just a second, I remembered what it felt like to be their son. Then I remembered the day they threw me out, calling me a thief, believing my sister's lie without question. I remembered sleeping in my car with $300 to my name while they changed the locks. The call ended, but I couldn't put the phone down. I sat there in my townhouse, this place I'd built from nothing, and let the memories flood back. 7 years ago, I was 25 years old, working 2 jobs and living at home to help cover family expenses. My father ran a small construction business out in Springfield. Nothing fancy but steady work that kept food on the table. My mother worked as a school secretary at the elementary school, where my sister and I had gone as kids. We were close back then, or at least I thought we were. Traditional working-class family, Sunday dinners, helping each other out when times got tough. Amanda was 2 years younger than me, and she'd always been the golden child. Straight-A student, college graduate, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I didn't mind it much. I loved my sister. I was proud of her. When she graduated from state with her business degree, I was the one cheering loudest in the crowd. The family had a joint savings account, mainly for business expenses and emergencies. Dad's construction work was seasonal, so we saved during the good months to cover the lean times. I helped manage it because I was good with numbers and computers. $38,000 we'd built up over the years. Not a fortune, but enough to feel secure. Then, one Tuesday in March, it was gone. Every penny. Amanda discovered it first. She was helping Mom with some paperwork and checked the account balance. She came running into the living room where I was watching television after my shift at the warehouse, her face pale, hands shaking. She said someone had emptied the entire account, transferred it all out that morning. The room went cold. Dad rushed over from his workshop. Mom started crying, and then Amanda looked right at me and said she'd seen me at the bank the day before. Said she had proof I'd been planning to run away. She pulled out her phone and showed them text messages I'd supposedly sent to some friend, talking about needing to disappear, start fresh somewhere else. Screenshots of searches on my laptop about opening accounts in other states. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. I tried to explain that I hadn't sent those messages, hadn't made those searches. But Amanda was crying now, playing the victim so perfectly. She said she hadn't wanted to believe it, but the evidence was right there. She said she'd noticed me acting strange lately, distant and secretive. My father's face went from confusion to rage in about 3 seconds. He didn't let me explain, didn't ask questions. He just started yelling, calling me a liar and a thief. My mother stood there sobbing, asking how I could do this to them, to my own family. They called the police right there. I got arrested in my own living room, handcuffed while my parents watched. Spent 48 hours in a cell before they finally released me. The bank records showed the transfer had been made online from a coffee shop across town. Security footage from the bank showed I'd never been there that day. The IP address didn't match any of my devices, but by the time the evidence cleared me, my family had already made up their minds. Dad told me never to contact them again, said I was dead to them. They changed the locks on the house, blocked my number, told our entire extended family that I'd stolen from them and run. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people I'd known my whole life. All of them turned their backs. I lost my warehouse job 3 days later. The arrest showed up on a background check, and even though charges weren't filed, my boss said he couldn't keep someone around who brought that kind of drama. I had $300 in my checking account and nowhere to go. I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot for 2 months, showering at a 24-hour gym I could barely afford. I tried calling my parents every day for the first month. Sent letters that came back unopened. Even went to my uncle's house, Dad's brother, begging him to talk to my father. He shut the door in my face, said family business stays in the family, and I'd made my choice when I stole from them. Nobody believed me. Nobody cared about the truth. They just knew the family money was gone. And Amanda said I took it. But I didn't take it. I never touched that money. Now, sitting in my living room 7 years later, I thought about how far I'd come. I owned a successful electrical contracting company. Started from nothing, taking small jobs, building a reputation for honest work and fair prices. Last year, I cleared $200,000. I had this townhouse in a decent neighborhood, a truck that was paid off, and a fiancée named Sarah who believed in me. My mother's voice on the phone had been desperate. She said Dad had a stroke last year and couldn't work anymore. The construction business had failed during the pandemic. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, facing foreclosure in 30 days. She said she'd found my number through a mutual acquaintance, though she wouldn't say who. She needed $50,000 to save the house. $50,000 from the son they'd thrown away like garbage. She used the line that made my blood run cold. "Blood is thicker than water," she'd said. "We're family." I hung up without answering. Sat there staring at the wall, feeling that old anger mixing with something I didn't want to admit might be guilt. They'd destroyed me without hesitation, but they were still my parents. They were struggling. My phone buzzed with a Facebook message. I almost ignored it, but then I saw it was from my cousin Tyler. We'd been close as kids, but he'd cut me off after the theft accusation like everyone else. I hadn't heard from him in 7 years. The message was short. "Your sister is still lying about you. She told everyone last week you were in jail for fraud, and that's why you never came around. She's telling people you're a criminal to explain why you're not helping them now." I read it 3 times. Amanda was still actively lying about me, still destroying my reputation. Even now, even as our parents faced losing everything, she was making sure everyone thought I was the villain. That's when I knew I couldn't just ignore this. I'd spent 7 years rebuilding my life, but I'd never cleared my name, never proved my innocence, never got justice. It was time to find out what really happened to that $38,000. The next morning, I called a private investigator named Frank Butler. I'd met him a year ago when he did a background check on a potential business partner for me. Former cop, retired after 25 years on the force, now running his own investigation service. He had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. His fee was $1,500 up front, but I didn't care about the cost. I needed answers. I met Frank at a diner near his office. He was in his late 50s, gray hair cut military short, still had that cop bearing about him. I laid out the whole story over coffee and eggs I couldn't really eat. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, he looked up at me with sharp blue eyes. 7 years is a long time. Digital trails get cold. But if there's something to find, I'll find it. I told Sarah about it that night. She was supportive but worried. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. She'd heard the story about my family before, but this was the first time I'd actively tried to dig into it. She held my hand across our kitchen table and said she understood, but asked me to be careful. She didn't want to see me hurt again. Frank worked fast. Within a week, he had results that made my chest tight. He'd gotten access to the bank records from 7 years ago, through legal channels, subpoenas from when the police had briefly investigated. The transfer had been made from a coffee shop called Java Junction on Maple Street. Frank pulled archived security footage from the coffee shop. Small businesses often kept old footage on external drives for insurance purposes, and Java Junction had been meticulous about their records. The footage showed Amanda sitting at a corner table with a laptop open. My laptop, the one I'd kept at home for family use. Timestamp showed 9:43 in the morning, the exact time the transfer was made. She'd logged into the account using my credentials, which she could access because we shared that family computer and I'd stupidly saved my passwords. Frank tracked where the money went. Amanda had transferred it to an account under a fake name, David Harrison. The account had been opened 2 days before the theft using a fake ID. The money stayed in that account for less than 6 hours before being withdrawn in cash from 3 different ATMs across the city. Whoever withdrew it knew how to avoid triggering fraud alerts. I had proof. My sister had stolen the money, but that just raised more questions. Where did the money go? What did she need $38,000 for so desperately that she'd destroy her own brother? Frank kept digging. The fake account for David Harrison was a dead end. No connections, no paper trail beyond the initial setup. But Frank was good at what he did. He started looking into Amanda's life from 7 years ago. Credit card statements, phone records, anything he could access legally or through contacts who owed him favors. What he found was a gambling problem. Amanda had been frequenting underground poker games in the city. High-stakes games run by people who didn't take kindly to debts. Frank found receipts for cash advances on credit cards, small loans from payday lenders, all the signs of someone spiraling into addiction. And 7 years ago, right around the time of the theft, she'd racked up a debt of $35,000 to a man named Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb had a criminal record: extortion, assault, illegal gambling operations. He'd been running poker games out of a warehouse for years before finally getting caught. Frank showed me the court records. Marcus had been convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 7 years in prison. 7 years. He'd just gotten out 3 months ago. And according to Frank's research into Amanda's recent finances, she'd taken out a personal loan for $20,000 last month. Her credit cards were maxed out. She was living in an apartment that cost $2,000 a month, driving a new BMW, but her salary as a pharmaceutical sales rep was only about $60,000 a year. The math didn't work unless she had another source of income or another source of debt. Frank's conclusion was simple. Amanda had stolen the family money to pay off her gambling debt to Marcus. She'd framed me to cover her tracks. And now, 7 years later, she was back in debt again. Probably to the same man. I drove past my parents' house that afternoon. I couldn't help myself. The place looked worse than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown, weeds pushing through the cracks in the driveway, paint peeling on the shutters. Dad's old truck sat in the driveway, rust eating away at the wheel wells. Through the front window, I could see my mother moving around inside. She looked older, worn down in a way that made my chest ache despite everything. I parked down the street, just watching. After about 20 minutes, Amanda's BMW pulled up. She got out wearing expensive clothes, designer sunglasses, carrying a purse that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage payment. She went inside, stayed for maybe 20 minutes, then left. I followed her. I know it sounds crazy, but I needed to see where she lived. Needed to understand how she could live in luxury while our parents struggled. She drove to an upscale apartment complex on the north side of town, the kind with a gated entrance and a fancy sign advertising luxury living. I watched her park in her assigned spot and head inside. Frank confirmed what I suspected. Amanda was living way beyond her means. $2,000 rent, $800 car payment, expensive clothes and regular trips to casinos. Her bank statements showed cash withdrawals every week, usually between $500 and $2,000. The pattern of someone with an active gambling addiction. The real shock came when Frank found the connection to Marcus Webb. Amanda had been in contact with him. Phone records showed calls and texts between them, starting 2 weeks after Marcus got out of prison. And there was more. Amanda had taken out that $20,000 loan the same week Marcus was released. She was in debt to him again. And this time, she couldn't steal from the family because they had nothing left to take. That's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. The timing of my parents' crisis. The foreclosure notice. My mother's desperate call. It all happened right when Amanda needed money again. This wasn't a coincidence. This was Amanda's doing. Frank spent the next few days digging deeper into my father's business failure. I'd assumed it was just bad luck, the pandemic killing small businesses across the country. But Frank found something that didn't sit right. Dad's construction company had gone under 2 years ago. According to my mother's phone call, it was because they'd lost contracts during the lockdowns. But Frank pulled records from the state licensing board and found something else entirely. Several major contracts had been canceled, not because of the pandemic, but because of complaints filed against the business. Anonymous complaints claimed safety violations, shoddy workmanship, failure to meet code requirements. The state had investigated each complaint and found nothing wrong, but by then the damage was done. Clients got nervous and pulled their contracts. Other potential clients went elsewhere. The business bled out over 6 months before Dad finally had to close up shop. Frank traced the IP address of the complaints. They'd been filed through an online portal, supposedly anonymously. But with a legal subpoena and some help from a contact in law enforcement, Frank got the real IP address. It came from Amanda's apartment. My sister hadn't just stolen from our parents 7 years ago. She'd actively sabotaged Dad's business, destroyed his livelihood, and I could only think of one reason why. She needed them vulnerable, desperate, easy to manipulate. Frank found more evidence of Amanda's systematic destruction of our parents' finances. Mom had a retirement account from her years working at the school. Last year, during Dad's recovery from his stroke, Amanda had been given power of attorney to help manage their affairs. That retirement account, worth about $42,000, had been cashed out early. Tax penalties, early withdrawal fees, all of it. The money supposedly went to medical expenses, except Frank tracked down the hospital bills from Dad's stroke. Insurance had covered most of it. Out-of-pocket expenses were maybe $8,000. So where did the other $34,000 go? Dad had a life insurance policy too, a small one worth about $25,000. He'd cashed it out early last year. Amanda had handled all the paperwork, told him it was necessary to keep the house. That money disappeared too. My sister hadn't just lied to destroy me. She'd been systematically draining our parents dry for years, using their trust and her position as the good daughter to rob them blind. And she'd done it all while maintaining her image as their devoted child who visited every week and helped with their bills. I felt sick. These weren't just crimes. This was predatory. Amanda had turned our parents into her personal piggy bank, bleeding them dry to feed her gambling addiction. My phone rang. Mom again. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear what she'd say. Her voice was even more desperate than before. 2 weeks until foreclosure now. She said Dad was too proud to call himself, but he was asking for help. He admitted they'd been wrong about me. She said they knew I was innocent now, that they were sorry. But there was no real apology in her words, no acknowledgement of what they'd done to me, just desperation for money, just need. I asked her how she knew I was innocent. She stammered, said they'd had time to think about it, that they realized Amanda's story never made sense. But she couldn't give me specifics. She didn't actually know the truth. She just needed my money badly enough to say whatever she thought I wanted to hear. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. Sarah found me sitting in the dark that night, just staring at the wall. She sat down next to me and asked what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know. Part of me wanted to save them. They were victims of Amanda too. They'd been manipulated and lied to just like I had been. But they'd also thrown me away without a second thought. They'd believed the worst of me instantly. They'd let me suffer and never looked back. And now they only wanted me because they needed something. The next day, Frank called with news that changed everything. He'd been tracking Marcus Webb, trying to understand the current situation with Amanda's debt. Marcus wasn't shy about his business. He ran his operations out of the same warehouse he'd used before prison, just more carefully now. Frank had a contact who'd infiltrated one of Marcus's poker games, asked around about Amanda. What he learned was terrifying. Amanda owed Marcus $60,000. Not $20,000 like I'd thought. She'd taken out that $20,000 loan to make a payment, but she was still in deep. And Marcus wasn't patient. He'd given her 30 days to come up with the full amount or face consequences. Those consequences weren't just threats. Marcus had a reputation for making examples of people who didn't pay. Broken bones, torched cars, worse. And he'd made it clear to Amanda that if she couldn't pay, her family would pay instead. Frank had a recording from his contact. Marcus telling Amanda that her parents had a nice house. Shame if something happened to it, or to them. My blood ran cold. The foreclosure wasn't the worst of my parents' problems. If Amanda couldn't pay her debt, Marcus would hurt them. Maybe burn down their house with them in it. Maybe worse. I was trapped. If I exposed Amanda, she couldn't pay Marcus and my parents would be in danger. If I paid their mortgage, Amanda would just keep gambling and the cycle would continue. If I did nothing, my parents would lose everything and possibly end up hurt or dead. Sarah suggested going to the police. But I knew from Frank that Marcus was smart. He didn't make direct threats that could be recorded or proven. His reputation did the work for him. By the time police could build a case, my parents could be dead. I made a decision that night. I'd pay Marcus directly, clear Amanda's debt anonymously. Then I'd expose everything Amanda had done to my parents. They'd finally see the truth about their golden child. And I'd walk away clean, knowing I'd saved them even though they didn't deserve it. Frank had contacts in that world. He set up a meeting with Marcus through an intermediary. I withdrew $60,000 in cash from my business account, put it in a duffel bag, and drove to a warehouse on the industrial side of town at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. Marcus was exactly what I expected. Late 40s, built like someone who'd spent time in prison staying strong. Cold eyes that calculated every angle. He had 2 guys with him. Muscle to make sure the meeting stayed professional. I put the duffel bag on a table between us. He opened it, checked the money, then looked at me with something like amusement. "You're the brother," he said. "Amanda mentioned you." I told him I was paying her debt in full. $60,000. We were done. She was done. Marcus counted out the money, then pulled out a piece of paper and wrote something on it. A receipt of sorts, dated and signed. He slid it across to me. "Your sister's got a problem," he said. "She'll be back in debt within a year. This isn't the first time, won't be the last." I told him that wasn't my problem anymore. I was paying to clear this debt, protect my parents, and then I was done with all of them. He laughed at that, gave me a look like he understood something I didn't. Then he told me to get out of his warehouse. I left feeling like I'd accomplished something. $60,000 was a lot of money, but it was worth it to know my parents were safe. Tomorrow I'd show them the truth about Amanda. They'd finally see what she'd done. And then I'd walk away with a clear conscience. The next morning, I called my mother and told her I wanted to meet, all of us. I had something important to discuss about the foreclosure and their situation. She was excited, hopeful, said she'd make sure Dad and Amanda were there. I arrived at their house at 2 in the afternoon with a folder full of evidence, bank records, photos of Amanda at the coffee shop, documentation of her sabotaging Dad's business, records of the stolen retirement money, and cashed-out life insurance. Everything Frank had found. The house smelled stale inside, like they'd stopped caring about maintenance. Dad sat in his recliner, looking older than I remembered. The stroke had left one side of his face slightly drooped. Mom hovered nearby, nervous and hopeful. And Amanda sat on the couch, calm as anything, looking at me with those calculating eyes. I put the folder on the coffee table and started laying it all out. Every piece of evidence, every crime she'd committed. I watched their faces as they processed what I was showing them. Dad kept saying this was ridiculous, that Amanda would never do this. Mom was crying, shaking her head, not wanting to believe it. But the evidence was right there. Bank records don't lie. Security footage doesn't lie. Amanda listened to everything quietly. Too quietly. When I finished, She didn't even seem upset. She just pulled out her phone and started recording. Then she turned the tables in a way I never saw coming. She said that I'd admitted to her yesterday that I'd been embezzling from my own company, that I was desperate for money, and that's why I was making up these lies about her. She said I'd tried to blackmail her into helping me cover up my crimes. She showed texts on her phone, messages supposedly from me, talking about financial problems and needing cash fast. The texts were fake. Had to be. But my parents didn't know that. Amanda kept going. She said she'd filed a police report that morning. Said I'd been harassing her, stalking her, threatening her. She had a temporary restraining order approved based on her sworn statement. Emergency order from a judge. And then the doorbell rang. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Amanda had called them before I even arrived. She'd set this whole meeting up as a trap. The officers asked me to step outside. Amanda followed, crying now, playing the victim perfectly. She said I'd violated the restraining order by coming near her, that she'd only come to my parents' house because they begged her, and then I'd shown up and cornered her. I tried to explain. Showed them the evidence in my folder, but they weren't interested in bank records and private investigator reports. They had a court order and a woman claiming I'd violated it. They arrested me right there on my parents' front lawn, handcuffed me while Mom and Dad watched from the doorway, confused and horrified. Amanda stood there crying, telling the officers she was scared of me, that I'd been getting worse and worse. As they put me in the back of the police car, Amanda walked past, close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "You should have stayed gone." I spent the night in a holding cell, my second time in jail for something I didn't do. The irony wasn't lost on me. 7 years ago it was theft. Now it was harassment and violating a restraining order I didn't even know existed until Amanda showed it to me. Sarah bailed me out the next morning. She looked tired and scared. We sat in her car in the police station parking lot, and I told her everything. About paying Marcus, about the evidence, about how Amanda had flipped everything on me. She held my hand and said we'd fight this, but I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. Not doubt about my innocence, but doubt about whether this was a fight we could win. My lawyer was a guy named Patrick Hayes, who'd handled my business contracts. He looked at the restraining order and the police report Amanda had filed and shook his head. This was bad. Amanda had filed first, establishing herself as the victim. She had fake evidence that looked real. She had a witness, some friend of hers who'd sworn she'd seen me threatening Amanda outside her apartment last week. The witness was lying. I'd never been to Amanda's apartment, but it was my word against 2 people, and Amanda had the court on her side. Patrick said I was looking at a court date next week. If convicted of violating the restraining order, I could face jail time, and the harassment charges were separate, even more serious. I'd need to prove Amanda had fabricated everything, which meant proving her text messages were fake and her witness was lying. That afternoon, everything started falling apart. News of my arrest reached my business partners. We had contracts with several major construction companies in the region. Most of those contracts had morality clauses. If a partner was involved in criminal activity, even just charged, not convicted, the clients could suspend or terminate the contract. 3 of my biggest clients called emergency meetings. They suspended their contracts pending the outcome of my case. Just like that, I lost nearly $200,000 in projected revenue. My company was stable, but not stable enough to absorb that kind of loss. I'd have to lay off workers, cut back on equipment, maybe even close down. Everything I'd built in 7 years was crumbling because of one phone call to the police and a fake restraining order. The restraining order meant I couldn't go near Amanda, my parents' house, or contact any family members. Frank couldn't investigate further without risking my case. Any contact with Amanda or her associates could be used against me in court. I was trapped. Amanda had completely outmaneuvered me. Sarah started pulling away. Not all at once, just little things. She stopped staying over at my place. Said she needed space to think. Her parents called her, concerned. They'd heard about the arrest through mutual friends. They asked if she really knew what she was getting into, marrying someone with this kind of family drama. A week after the arrest, Sarah came over with tears in her eyes. She said she loved me, but this was too much. The legal trouble, the business problems, the family situation. She couldn't handle it. She suggested we postpone the wedding. Maybe take a break until everything settled down. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that this was exactly when I needed her most. But I saw the fear in her eyes, and I couldn't blame her. From the outside, this looked insane. It looked like I was either guilty or at least dangerously involved in something toxic. She left the ring on my kitchen counter and walked out. I sat there alone in the townhouse I'd worked so hard to afford, watching my life fall apart for the second time. Frank called 2 days later with information that should have helped but somehow made everything worse. He'd been doing one final round of research before we stopped the investigation for legal reasons. He'd looked into the foreclosure notice my parents had received. Something about it bothered him, so he called the mortgage company directly, pretending to be my father to verify details. The foreclosure notice was fake. The letterhead looked official, but it wasn't from the actual mortgage company. My parents were behind on payments, 3 months in arrears, but no foreclosure had been filed. They were in default and would need to catch up soon, but they had time. There was no 30-day deadline, no immediate crisis. Amanda had created a fake foreclosure notice. She'd sent it to our parents to panic them into reaching out to me. She'd probably found my phone number for them too, knowing exactly how to manipulate the situation. The realization hit me like a truck. This was all a setup from the beginning. Amanda knew I'd come back if the family was in crisis. She knew I'd investigate. She needed to destroy my credibility before I could expose her. So she created the fake crisis, lured me back, and had her trap ready the moment I showed my face. The restraining order, the witness, the fake text messages, all of it planned. She'd protected herself and discredited me in one move. Now my parents trusted her more than ever because I looked like an unhinged stalker making up conspiracy theories. Patrick looked at the fake foreclosure notice and said we might be able to use it to prove Amanda was manipulating the situation. But it wasn't enough to disprove her harassment claims. We needed more. The court date arrived. I wore a suit and tried to look respectable. Amanda showed up looking scared and vulnerable, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom with her lawyer. She testified first, told the judge about how I'd been harassing her for weeks, calling her phone from blocked numbers, following her around town, showing up at her apartment. She cried when she described how frightened she'd been. Said she'd only filed the restraining order after I'd threatened her outside her building. Her witness testified next. A woman named Jessica Brennan who claimed to be Amanda's friend. She swore she'd seen me grab Amanda's arm and threaten her in the parking lot of Amanda's apartment complex. Said she'd heard me tell Amanda I'd make her pay for what she'd done. It was a complete fabrication. I'd never been there, never touched Amanda, never said any of that, but I had no way to prove it. Then Patrick called Marcus Webb to the stand. I hadn't known this was the plan, but Patrick had subpoenaed Marcus through the court system. If Marcus testified about Amanda's gambling debts and the scheme she'd proposed, it would undermine her credibility. Marcus showed up in a decent suit, looking almost respectable. He testified that Amanda owed him money. Said she'd approached him weeks ago with a plan. She'd promised to manipulate her brother into paying her debts. Then they'd split the money and she'd accuse me of harassment to get me out of the picture permanently. Amanda's lawyer objected repeatedly. The judge allowed the testimony but looked skeptical. Marcus was a convicted criminal. His word against Amanda's didn't carry much weight. Marcus described the warehouse meeting where I'd paid $60,000. Said Amanda had promised him I'd pay and that she'd frame me afterward. But Marcus said he'd double-crossed her, kept the money, and now she still owed him. The judge asked if Marcus had any proof of this arrangement with Amanda. He said it was all verbal, no paper trail. The judge looked unimpressed. Patrick tried to use the fake foreclosure notice to show Amanda's pattern of manipulation. The judge said it was concerning, but not directly relevant to the harassment charges. In the end, the judge said the case was too complex for a summary hearing. He ordered a full investigation. The restraining order would remain in place temporarily. The criminal charges against me were suspended pending the investigation. Nobody won. We were stuck in legal limbo. Outside the courthouse, media was waiting. Local news crews. Amanda had tipped them off, made sure they'd be there. The story was irresistible. Man arrested for harassing sister claims. Elaborate conspiracy. Every photo showed me looking guilty. Every interview showed Amanda looking terrified. The story went viral locally. My business phone started ringing with clients wanting to cancel contracts. That night, Patrick called. Amanda was in the hospital. She'd taken a bottle of pills. Suicide attempt. She'd left a note saying my harassment and lies had driven her to it. She'd survived. Someone found her in time, called 911, got her stomach pumped. But the damage was done. The news ran with it. Man drives sister to suicide attempt. Social media exploded. People who didn't know any of the facts attacked me online. My company Facebook page got flooded with one-star reviews and hateful comments calling me a monster. More clients pulled their contracts. Sarah's family called her, begging her to stay away from me. She'd already left, but now she was getting pressured from every direction. I sat alone in my townhouse watching my business die, my reputation destroyed, my life in ruins. Amanda had done it again, taken everything from me. And this time she'd done it even more thoroughly than before. Frank called with information that should have mattered but felt meaningless at that point. He'd investigated Amanda's suicide attempt. The hospital records showed she'd taken exactly the right amount of pills to make her sick, but not kill her. She'd called 911 herself before taking them. The timing was perfect, calculated so she'd be found and saved. The suicide note had been printed, not handwritten. Easier to plan out, easier to fake emotion. It was staged. Another manipulation, another lie. Frank had more. He'd gotten information from a source at the hospital. Amanda's roommate, during her overnight observation, had recorded her on the phone. Amanda had been talking to someone, asking if it had worked, if I was done yet. She'd said once she got out of the hospital, they'd finish me. The suicide attempt was completely fake, and she was planning something worse. But what could be worse than what she'd already done? She'd destroyed my business, my reputation, my relationship. She'd turned me into a pariah. What else was left? I'd find out soon enough. Frank handed me the recording from the hospital roommate. The woman had been suspicious of Amanda's behavior, the way she'd been calm and collected right after supposedly trying to end her life. She'd recorded Amanda on her phone without Amanda knowing. The audio was clear. Amanda's voice saying the pills worked perfectly, asking if the news had picked up the story, then saying they needed to finish me off completely once she was released from observation. I asked Frank who she was talking to. He didn't know. The call had been to an unknown number, probably a burner phone. My lawyer said the recording was inadmissible. Recorded without consent, obtained improperly. But it proved Amanda was running a con. We just couldn't use it in court directly. The legal system moved slowly. Days turned into weeks. The restraining order stayed in place. The investigation continued. My business continued to hemorrhage money and clients. I had to lay off 4 employees, good people who'd worked for me for years. I couldn't afford to keep them with half my contracts canceled. Sarah hadn't called in 3 days, then a week. Then I saw on social media that she'd started seeing someone else, some guy from her office. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did, but watching her move on while I was drowning felt like another betrayal. I barely slept, barely ate, spent my days trying to keep my business afloat and my nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how Amanda kept winning. Then Frank called with urgent news. He'd been tracking Amanda's movements despite the restraining order, preventing me from having contact. She'd been meeting with someone regularly, a woman in her 30s, professional-looking. Frank had followed them to coffee shops, restaurants, always deep in conversation. He'd finally identified the woman, Jessica Brennan, the supposed witness who'd testified that she'd seen me threaten Amanda. They weren't just friends. Frank had dug into Jessica's background. She worked at the same pharmaceutical company as Amanda. They'd been work friends for years. But more importantly, Jessica had financial problems, gambling debts of her own. And 2 weeks before the court hearing, Jessica had suddenly paid off $20,000 in credit card debt. Amanda had paid Jessica to lie on the stand. Frank had bank records showing a cash deposit into Jessica's account. The timing was perfect. Right after Marcus got paid, right before the hearing. We had proof of witness tampering. Patrick filed motions immediately. This changed everything. If we could prove Jessica had been paid to lie, Amanda's entire case fell apart. The investigation shifted. Police interviewed Jessica. At first, she stuck to her story, but when confronted with the bank records and the connection to Amanda's gambling connections through Marcus, she cracked. Jessica admitted she'd never seen me threaten Amanda. Said Amanda had offered her money to testify. Said she'd been desperate because of her own debts, and Amanda had convinced her it was harmless, just helping a friend with a difficult family situation. With Jessica's confession, the restraining order was lifted. The harassment charges against me were dropped. The prosecutor's office opened an investigation into Amanda for filing a false police report, perjury, and witness tampering. I should have felt relieved, vindicated. But I just felt empty. The local news ran a correction. Woman arrested for elaborate fraud scheme against brother and parents. The story got a fraction of the attention the original one had. The damage to my reputation was done. Most people who'd seen the first story would never see the correction. My business was destroyed. Even with the charges dropped, the clients who'd left weren't coming back. The contracts were terminated, money gone. I'd have to start over from scratch again, build a new reputation, convince people to trust me. Sarah didn't call to apologize, didn't come back. She'd moved on, and I couldn't blame her. I wouldn't want to be part of this mess either. But there was one piece of satisfaction. My parents would finally know the truth. The police contacted them as part of their investigation into Amanda's crimes. They had to explain about the fake foreclosure notice, the stolen retirement money, the sabotaged business, all of it. Frank's evidence became part of the official record. I didn't call them, didn't reach out. Let them process what their golden child had really been doing all these years. It took 3 days before my mother called. Her voice was broken. She cried through most of the conversation. Said they'd been so wrong. Said they couldn't believe what Amanda had done, how she'd lied and stolen and destroyed their lives while pretending to help them. Dad got on the phone. His voice was rough, impaired from the stroke, but clear enough. He said he was sorry. Said they should have believed me 7 years ago. Should have investigated instead of just accepting Amanda's story. They wanted to see me. Wanted to apologize in person. Wanted me back in their lives. And they needed help. Still needed help. The mortgage was still in default. They were still struggling. Dad couldn't work. Mom's salary wasn't enough. Without Amanda's supposed assistance, they had nothing. I listened to all of it. Felt something cold settling in my chest. Then I told them the truth. I said, 7 years ago they threw me out like garbage. Didn't ask questions. Didn't investigate. Didn't believe me. Called me a thief and disowned me. I slept in my car. Had nothing. And they didn't care. 3 weeks ago, they called not because they missed me, not because they wanted to make amends, but because they needed money. I'd paid $60,000 to protect them from a criminal they didn't even know was threatening them. I'd tried to expose Amanda to save them. And what happened? They believed her again. watched the police arrest me, didn't defend me. Now Amanda was in jail, and they were sorry. But they weren't sorry for what they'd done to me. They were sorry because they needed me again. I told them I'd learned something in 7 years. Family isn't blood. Family is the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. Family believes you when the world doesn't. They weren't my family. They stopped being my family when they chose to believe I was a thief without evidence. Stopped being my family when they didn't care that I was suffering. Sarah had left me during this mess, but 3 days ago she'd come back. She'd said she was wrong, that she should have trusted me. That was family. My mother begged, said they were still my parents, said they'd made mistakes, but they loved me. I told them they disowned me. Their words. I was dead to them. Their words. I hung up. The house felt too quiet after that phone call. I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling hollowed out. Amanda's trial moved forward quickly. With Jessica's confession and all of Frank's evidence, the case was straightforward. Amanda was charged with multiple counts: filing a false police report, perjury, witness tampering, elder abuse for stealing from our parents, fraud for the fake foreclosure notice, and embezzlement for the retirement account and life insurance money. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor wasn't interested in being lenient. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was years of calculated manipulation and theft. The trial lasted 3 days. I attended every session, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Amanda never looked at me, just sat next to her lawyer, wearing conservative clothes, trying to look remorseful. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, Frank's investigation, Jessica's testimony, Marcus's testimony about the gambling debts and the scheme, hospital records showing the staged suicide attempt. The recording from the hospital roommate got played in court, Amanda's own voice talking about finishing me off. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison, plus restitution to our parents for the money she'd stolen. She'd have to pay back the retirement account and life insurance money. Good luck doing that from a prison cell, on a prison salary. As they led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she finally looked at me. No tears, no emotion, just cold calculation in her eyes. Even now, even caught and convicted, she looked like she was planning her next move. The local news covered the sentencing. My name got cleared publicly. The business that had accused me of harassment had to issue corrections. Some of my former clients reached out, said they'd been too hasty, asked if we could work together again. I told them no. They'd abandoned me when things looked bad. They'd believed the worst without asking questions. Same as my parents. Same as half the people I'd known. I didn't need clients like that. Sarah came back, like I'd told my parents she had. She apologized for leaving, for not trusting me. Said she'd been scared and overwhelmed, but she should have stayed. She wanted to try again. Wanted to start over. I looked at the woman I'd planned to marry. The woman who'd left when I needed her most. And I realized I didn't trust her anymore. Maybe that wasn't fair. Maybe she'd just been human, just made a mistake. But I couldn't forget the feeling of sitting alone in this house, watching my life fall apart while she was out with someone else. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I thought we should stay apart. She cried, said she understood, said she hoped I'd find someone who deserved me. After she left, I sat alone again, but it felt different this time. Not lonely, just quiet. My parents called every day for a week. I didn't answer. They left voicemails. Mom crying, Dad's impaired voice trying to apologize. They sent letters, showed up at my business. I had Frank tell them to stop contacting me or I'd get a restraining order. The irony of that wasn't lost on anyone. Extended family started reaching out too. Aunts, uncles, cousins who'd turned their backs 7 years ago. They all had apologies. They all wanted to reconnect. They all claimed they'd never really believed I was a thief. They'd just been respecting my parents' wishes. I ignored all of them. If they'd wanted to know the truth, they could have asked 7 years ago. They could have reached out when I was sleeping in my car. They chose not to. Their regret now meant nothing to me. Tyler, my cousin who'd sent that first Facebook message warning me about Amanda's lies, was the only one I responded to. I thanked him for the heads up and said I appreciated him breaking the family silence. He said he'd always felt guilty about cutting me off. Said he was young and stupid and following his parents' lead. I told him I understood, but I wasn't interested in reconnecting with the family. He respected that. Said if I ever changed my mind, he'd be around. Frank closed his investigation. I paid him his fees plus a substantial bonus. He'd saved my life, really. Without his work, I'd still be facing criminal charges and Amanda would have gotten away with everything. He shook my hand when we settled up. Said in 30 years of this work, he'd never seen a case quite like mine. Said I should be proud of how I'd handled it. Said a lot of people would have given up. I didn't feel proud. I just felt tired. My business was struggling but surviving. I'd lost the big contracts, but I was picking up smaller jobs, rebuilding my reputation one project at a time. It would take years to get back to where I'd been, but I'd done it before. I could do it again. The house felt empty most nights. I'd gotten used to Sarah being there. Now it was just me and too much space. I thought about selling it, moving somewhere new, starting completely fresh. But that felt like running away, and I was done running. One night, about 2 months after Amanda's sentencing, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Dad. His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. He'd had another stroke. A small one, but it had set him back. He was calling from the hospital. Mom was there with him. He said they were losing the house next week. Final foreclosure. They'd tried to work with the bank, but they were too far behind. They were going to lose everything. He wasn't calling to ask for money. He just wanted me to know. Wanted me to hear it from him, instead of through the grapevine. He said he knew I wouldn't help. Said he understood why. Said he deserved it for what he'd done to me. Then he said something that caught me off guard. He said he was proud of me. Proud of how I'd built a life from nothing. Proud of how I'd survived everything Amanda and they had put me through. Proud of the man I'd become, despite having no family to support me. He said he wished he could have been a better father. Wished he'd believed me. Wished he'd been there when I needed him. He said he loved me, and he was sorry. And then he hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling something crack inside my chest. They were losing the house, going to be homeless. Dad was sick. Mom was elderly. They had nowhere to go, and I had the money to save them. Not easily, but I could do it. Could pay off enough of the mortgage to stop the foreclosure. Could set them up somewhere stable. I could save them. The question was whether I should. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in my living room, thinking about everything. About sleeping in my car 7 years ago, while my parents lived comfortably in that house. About building a business from nothing. About Amanda destroying me twice, and my parents believing her both times. About Dad's voice on the phone, broken and resigned. About what it meant to be family. Morning came, and I still hadn't decided. I went to work, went through the motions of running my business. Around noon, Frank called. He'd been keeping tabs on Amanda in prison, making sure she wasn't causing more trouble. He'd heard through his contacts that she was already working angles, trying to manipulate other inmates and guards. Some people never change. He also mentioned he'd heard my parents were losing the house. Asked if I was going to help them. I told him I didn't know. He said something that stuck with me. He said revenge isn't always about hurting people back. Sometimes revenge is just living well and not letting them take any more from you. That afternoon, I drove past my parents' house one last time. The foreclosure sign was up. The yard was even more overgrown. Curtains drawn. The house I'd grown up in, where I'd had birthday parties and learned to ride a bike and eaten Sunday dinners, looking sad and defeated. I thought about the people inside. My mother, who'd raised me but who'd also let me go without a fight. My father, who'd taught me to work hard but who'd called me a thief and thrown me out. People who'd made terrible mistakes, but who'd also been victims of Amanda's manipulation. I thought about 7 years of silence, 7 years of struggle, 7 years of building myself back up without any of them. Then I thought about the man I wanted to be. Not the man they'd made me, not the man Amanda had tried to destroy, but the man I'd chosen to become. I drove away. That evening, I called my lawyer, Patrick, told him to draw up papers. I was willing to make a one-time payment to stop the foreclosure, but with conditions. The house would be sold. The proceeds would go to paying off the mortgage and settling their debts. My parents would get a small apartment that I'd pay rent on for 1 year. After that, they were on their own. They'd have to figure out how to survive on Mom's Social Security and whatever assistance they could get. I wouldn't be in their lives, wouldn't take their calls, wouldn't visit. This was me ensuring they weren't homeless, not me rebuilding a relationship. Patrick asked if I was sure. I told him I was. The papers were delivered to my parents' house 3 days before the foreclosure sale. They called immediately. I didn't answer. They left voicemails crying and thanking me. I deleted them without listening all the way through. The house sold. They moved to a small apartment across town. I never saw it, never contacted them. Frank kept me updated to make sure they'd actually moved and weren't trying to contact me. After a month, the calls stopped. They'd gotten the message. My business slowly recovered. It took a year, but I rebuilt my client base. Started landing bigger contracts again. Different ones, better ones. Companies that valued integrity and gave people the benefit of the doubt before cutting ties. I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She worked as a nurse at the hospital where Dad had been treated. We met at a coffee shop, started talking, discovered we had similar tastes in movies and music. I told her about my family situation on our 3rd date. Laid it all out, expected her to run. She didn't. She said everyone has baggage. She said what mattered was how you dealt with it. She said I seemed like someone who dealt with it as well as anyone could. We took things slow. No rushing into engagement. No moving in together right away. Just building something solid and real, piece by piece. Tyler reached out again about a year after Amanda's sentencing. Said some of the extended family wanted to apologize in person. Have a dinner. Clear the air. I told him I appreciated the gesture, but I wasn't interested. I'd built a good life. I had people in it who cared about me. I didn't need to rehash the past with people who'd abandoned me when it mattered. He understood. Said the offer would stand if I ever changed my mind. I thanked him and moved on. Amanda got out of prison after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence. Good behavior, apparently. Some people can manipulate even the parole board. Frank let me know when she was released. Asked if I wanted him to keep tabs on her. I said no. She wasn't my problem anymore. Whatever she did with her life was her choice. I just hoped she stayed far away from me and our parents. 2 years after everything fell apart and came back together, I sat in my townhouse one evening with Rachel. We'd just finished dinner. She was reading a book on the couch. I was doing paperwork for a big contract I'd just landed. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was Mom. Just 3 words. Thank you. I'm sorry. I looked at those words for a long time. Felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not reconciliation. Just acknowledgement that some wounds heal in strange ways. That you can move on without forgetting. That you can be at peace without reconciling. I didn't respond. Just deleted the message and put my phone away. Rachel looked up and asked if everything was okay. I smiled at her and said yes. Everything was okay, because it was. I'd built a life that wasn't defined by what had been done to me. I'd chosen who got to be in it and who didn't. I'd learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about showing up, about believing someone when they tell you the truth, about standing by them when everything falls apart. My parents had called themselves family while throwing me away. Amanda had used family as a weapon, but the people in my life now, Rachel and Frank, and the friends I'd made building my business, they were family in the way that mattered. I learned something through all of this that I want to share. People think family means you owe them forgiveness. That blood creates an obligation to save them, to sacrifice for them, to let them back in no matter what they've done. But that's not true. Real family is earned, not given by biology. Real family shows up when you're sleeping in your car with $300 to your name. Real family believes you when everyone else calls you a liar. Real family stands beside you when the world turns against you. I don't hate my parents. I don't hate Amanda. Even after everything she did, hate takes energy and attention, and they don't deserve any more of mine. I just don't care anymore. They're strangers who share my DNA, nothing more. I built a life from nothing twice. Once when they threw me out. Once when Amanda tried to destroy me. Each time, I proved I didn't need them, that I could survive and thrive on my own terms. They wanted me to save them from losing everything. Instead, I saved myself. I let them face the consequences of their choices while I built something beautiful with people who actually deserved to be in my life. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's building a beautiful life without them and not looking back. It's finding peace in your own choices and surrounding yourself with people who see your worth. I'm 32 years old now. I own a successful business. I have a woman I love who loves me back. I have genuine friends. I have a life I'm proud of. And I built it all without the people who were supposed to support me from the beginning. That's not a tragedy. That's a triumph. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from family to save yourself? Have you ever had to choose your own peace over obligation to people who hurt you? It's one of the hardest decisions anyone can make, but sometimes it's the only way to move forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe helps someone else who's going through something similar feel less alone. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building strength from hardship, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who's struggling with the weight of family obligation and wondering if it's okay to choose themselves. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. These things never are. But I hope it gave you something to think about. I hope it reminded you that you have the power to choose who gets to be in your life, regardless of biology. And I hope it showed you that you can survive anything, build anything, become anything, even when the people who should support you turn their backs. Take care of yourselves. Choose people who choose you. And remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and build something better. Thank you.